Hello, everyone, and welcome to this panel. My name is Anna Bond. I'm the Director of Global Business Development at Songtrust. Songtrust is the world's largest technology solution for global music publishing, royalty collection, and administration. We were founded in 2011 with a mission of making world-class publishing administration available to everyone. Now we administer over 2 million songs and over 300,000 songwriters, and that's everyone from independents just starting out to well-known songwriters who have cuts with major stars. And I'm excited to introduce our panel. This represents a huge wealth of publishing industry knowledge on a lot of sides, so this is going to be an exciting conversation. Pablo Rodriguez, the Managing Director of BMG for Spain and Portugal. In his role as BMG's Managing Director for Spain and Portugal, Pablo is responsible for growing the local repertoire in music publishing and recordings. For the last 15 years, he's been in the music industry, including roles at Warner Music Spain and Sony ATV. He's also given lectures in the music business field, including at the University of Valencia and the SAE Institute. Yvonne Drazen, the Vice President of the Latin West Coast Division for Peer Music. Yvonne is born and raised in LA. She's been in the music industry for over 25 years and has been at Peer Music since 2003. She currently represents Latin writers and artists like Gloria Trevi, La Mala Rodriguez, Molotov, Victor Manuel, Sofia Reyes, and many more. She was formerly label manager at the Circo label imprint of Universal and was the national manager of media relations at Rhino Records, working with heritage artists like the Ramones, Los Lobos, and the Sugar Hill Gang, among others. Drazen started her career in marketing promotion at EMI Latin in 1991. Pablo Ahogado, the creative director of Concord Music Publishing. In his role, Pablo manages the signing and development of songwriters and artists. Recent signings include Chicano Batman and While She Fire of Major Lazer. Additionally, he oversees licensing initiatives for Concord's Latin repertoire. Concord Music represents over 390,000 compositions spanning all musical genres, with artists including Mark Ronson, Daft Punk, George Harrison, and legendary catalogs like Fania Records and Rodgers and Hammerstein. Prior to Concord, Pablo was the VP of Music Publishing for Fania. Gabriela Gonzalez, the Vice President of US Latin and Latin America for ASCAP. In her role, she oversees the Latin membership departments in Los Angeles, Miami, Puerto Rico, and New York, and works very closely with songwriters and the broader music industry. Gabriela is responsible for signing Latin songwriters to ASCAP, creating and organizing the ASCAP Latin Awards, songwriting camps, showcases, and events that benefit ASCAP members throughout the world. And I have Jorge Mejia, the president and CEO of Sony ATV Music Publishing Latin America and US Latin. Jorge is the president and CEO at Sony ATV Music Publishing Latin America and US Latin. And in that role, he's responsible for Sony ATV Music Publishing across Latin America and the US Latin market. The Latin American operation includes offices in Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, and Miami, all of which report to Jorge. In addition, Jorge is a classical pianist and composer who has been nominated for a Latin Grammy for the Best Classical Contemporary Composition. So Jorge is well-rounded. And he is based in Miami, Florida. So that is our panel. Thanks so much to everyone for being here. Since we are going to get a little in-depth about the publishing world, and we know that our audience is going to have a broad range of understanding, I'm going to do a very quick publishing basics overview. I'm not going to do any diagrams. I am going to very briefly plug a resource that Songtrust makes available on our website called The Modern Guide to Music Publishing. It's a free download, and it essentially goes kind of from soup to nuts, goes into the very basics of publishing and gets very in the weeds about the global market, and is a great reference for professionals, but also a really great guide for people who just need a starter. So we've got a song. Every song has the master and the composition. Because we're talking about publishing, we're talking about the composition, not the master recording. There are two types of publishing royalties: performance royalties and mechanical royalties. And those performance royalties are divided even further into the writer share and the publisher share. Now, digital streaming, Spotify, Apple Music, earns a mechanical and a performance royalty. Physical sales and download sales earn mechanical royalties, but those are collected very differently. YouTube has multiple types of royalties earned by the master owner and the publisher and the writer. And those all, kind of come together in the mishmash of collections that your publishing administrator or potentially you on your own, if you're very ambitious, can collect on behalf of your compositions. So to get things started with a great question. So one of the biggest mistakes we all, I'm sure, have seen independent artists make is not registering their songs with the Performing Rights Society, like BMI or ASCAP in the United States, or ex-US societies like SACAM in Mexico or Abramus in Brazil. So Gabriela, since you're here representing ASCAP, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions. What does a PRO do for its members? What kind of royalties does it collect? And what other contributions do PROs make to the broader music industry?
Thank you for having me. Well, the performing rights organizations, we collect performance royalties for streaming services, concerts, radio, television, and we distribute those royalties to our writer members and our publisher members. We have sister societies around the world that also collect in their own territories, and then will pay the society where the songwriter belongs to. It is key for songwriters to affiliate to a society, because if not, they would be losing that money. That's money that they can't collect on their own. It's something that a society has to do for them. We have licenses with these services throughout the country that we represent, and we will collect that money whether the writer is affiliated or not. We need to be able to pay the writer. It's very important to clarify that it has to be the songwriter, not the, if it's an artist, they don't have to affiliate, but if they write the songs, they must affiliate to Performing Rights Society around the world. Anywhere where they live, or where it's their choice, where they want to. We also, here in the United States, we have creative departments, people that help them throughout their careers, whether it is posting online or helping them promote their songs or their news or things that are happening with them. We also create song camps for artists. We have our Latin Awards, of course, where we award the most performed songs. And we like to become a little bit of part of their team somehow and help them out in their career when they need it.
Fantastic. And how does a songwriter go about joining a PRO? And can you explain the distinction between writer and publisher shares, maybe for a songwriter who's just starting out and doesn't yet have a separate publishing agreement?
Yes, affiliating is very, very easy. You can do it online, basically, with any society now, wherever you're living. I mean, you can go to the website, ascap.com, and look there, it says join ASCAP. It gives you all the information that you need. Or if you're in any other society throughout the world, I think you can also do it online. The distinction between the songwriter and the publisher's shares is that we have to pay half of the collected money to the songwriter share and the other half to the publisher share. We collect $10, for example, from a performance. We give $5 to the writer and $5 to the publisher member. So if the songwriter does not have a publishing entity at the time and they wish to collect for both the writer share and the publisher share, they have to become a publisher member here in the US. It's very simple. They just have to affiliate online and just create a name, and they can become their own publisher for the collection of that at that moment.
So in order to collect all of their performance royalties, they need to be affiliated as a songwriter and a publisher, or have a relationship with a publisher or an administrator.
Exactly, or have a publisher, run. The publisher will collect.
Yeah. Yeah, the PRO affiliation is such a key relationship, especially early in a songwriter's career. I'd love to hear from anyone else on the panel who has, maybe perspectives on working with songwriters to affiliate them with PROs, or any common questions that you've heard from songwriters that you've worked with about, what PRO is best, like what can my PRO do for me? If there are any other perspectives on the panel.
Sure, I can add a little bit to that. PROs are key for songwriters because they really help mentor at an early stage, and then also help collect royalties that are otherwise not collectible. In Latin America, PROs serve an even greater role, I think, because they also provide quite a bit of services, as in social services. They will help take care of their songwriter members. ASCAP and BMI and CSAC also do it to a certain extent here. But throughout a songwriter's life, a PRO is going to be a relationship that is going to be there. Finally, as far as which PRO is best, I always like to tell my writers, wherever you feel that, wherever you feel most at home. And it's also what I tell writers in general for publishing deals. Yeah. The best publishing company is the publishing company that makes you feel the most at home. Yeah. The place where you have the best relationship, where you feel good, where you feel like it's a family. I think Gabby will hopefully agree with me with that statement.
Yes, definitely. It's always where you feel comfortable, the best connection that you have, who you think is going to be able to be there for you the longest and help you the most.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've covered PROs and performance royalties, and we went over the very basics about mechanicals. When you join a PRO, you're covering half of the royalties, right? You've got the performance royalties covered, but a little bit more difficult is collecting the different types of mechanical royalties, both digital streaming and those physical and download sales royalties. A couple of questions. First, what are the basics about how to get those collected? And how has the world of mechanical royalties changed when streaming became the primary mode of consumption for music in most countries? And I'm gonna have Pablo Rodriguez address this one, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, basically, I was going to tell to the previous question that basically in Spain and Portugal, the society is working in a different way that in the States. No, basically here, the same society collect performing and mechanical rights. And the writer, even if the writer doesn't have a publishing agreement, he's able to, or she's able to collect 100% of the performance and the mechanical. And basically here, both in Portugal and in Spain, the mechanical and the performance, we don't have that. We have that split, of course, but in terms of a writer, we don't have that differentiation. They give those rights to the society. They license those rights. They give that right to manage their songs, and the publisher, basically what we do is we add value to that management, basically. Mm-hmm.
That's a really good point, and it's something that people often get confused about, is the difference between a PRO, like the US options, your ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC, and a CMO, like the Spain and Portugal societies, who are collecting both the performance and the mechanical. So with mechanical royalties, if you are only affiliated with a PRO, if the CMO is not available in your territory, you're going to have to do a little more work. And maybe Pablo Algado, do you want to pick that one up and address what songwriters have to do, say if they're with a US PRO, in order to make sure they get their mechanicals, especially their streaming mechanicals, collected?
Sure. That's not really my expertise, but I do know that the association in the US that handles all the mechanicals is Harry Fox.
Yes.
So one way they could do it is through Harry Fox, joining a member. Yes, I would say.
Yeah. And that is the case.
If I could,
sorry.
If I could clarify that too, just a little bit. Harry Fox does handle mechanicals for a great number of writers and publishers, but in the US you can collect mechanicals directly as well.
Correct. Yes.
So you can have a publishing company collecting mechanicals. Publishing companies in the US will collect mechanicals, sync, and everything pretty much except performance.
Yeah, a lot of the publishers in the US, including Songtrust, have direct relationships with the DSPs for streaming mechanicals, as well as direct relationships with labels for physical mechanicals and downloads. As an independent, you have the option of signing with a publisher or an administrator, or going directly with Harry Fox and the other mechanical aggregator. Music Reports though those aren't tremendously easy websites to navigate, unlike the ASCAP website. So you've got performance, you've got mechanicals covered independently, but a lot of writers out there, for good reason, are looking for a publishing agreement. They want the additional support that a publisher can offer. And so if you, Yvonne, could go over the kind of major types of publishing agreements that a writer could anticipate encountering, and maybe some of the pros and cons of each of them, and some advice on how to navigate these conversations with publishers for independent songwriters.
Sure. I think that, I mean, there's a lot of different ways. Obviously, everything, when you're getting into a contractual situation with a publisher, everything is negotiable, and there's a million little things that can be switched around and adjusted depending on what that writer in particular is looking for. But under general terms, I think all of us kind of work on either an administration basis or a co-publishing basis. Mm-hmm. And so in those two scenarios, it's really about the exchange of the copyright ownership. So we're talking about those two halves. In an administration agreement, we would be administering the writer share and the publisher share, but the publisher share stays, the ownership of the publisher share remains with the writer themselves. And all we're doing is administering and collecting the money on their behalf with a percentage that we keep for doing that work. In the co-publishing agreement, they would actually be giving one half of that half ownership to whatever publishing entity that they're going into business with. And we become their partners as their co-publisher. And then we handle the administration in the same way for the entire pie, both our share and their share. So it just kind of depends. I mean, every writer is different. Every writer has different needs that they're looking for, different comfort levels as far as giving up their a piece of their publishing to a publishing partner or not. Advances come into play too, depending on where they are in their careers, and also where they are in their head, or where they think they are sometimes in their head. Sometimes those two things are totally opposite, but you know, everything is open for discussion. And so it just, you know, I honestly, if it's, you know, within those two realms, I don't have very many deals that are even similar sometimes, because there's so many little things within each kind of those agreements that can be negotiated out or down or up, or, you know, whatever, depending on what it is. But under general terms, I think all of us on the publishing side are kind of looking at those two structures, whether it's an admin structure or a co-publishing structure. And so
there's also,
oh, sorry.
I was going to add, there's a third kind of type of contract that maybe goes under the co-pub bucket that Yvonne was mentioning, and it's been happening a lot lately. It's a joint venture deal in which the publisher has an agreement with the writer or artist or producer that's established and already has a crew of artists and producers that he brings to the table.
Right.
And in that sense, the publisher is more of the infrastructure for this venture and gives all the admin work that's needed. So, yeah.
So in a JV, that would obviously be someone who's pretty established, but there would be kind of financial and creative support coming from the partner, but a lot of the A&R and a lot of the creative direction is coming from the partner.
That's exactly right. The publisher is betting on the access that the partner has and a creative focus that they're going to bring to the table. Right.
Kind of comparable to a major label funding an imprint for a superstar artist, just on the other side of the rights. And in terms of co-pub versus admin, you know, say you have a writer who's on a certain level and has multiple offers. In general, are you going to see a bigger advance and more creative support with a co-pub, or is that going to vary a lot? Yvonne, if you want to follow up on that one.
It's not always completely the deciding factor. Right. Like, for example, we have a couple of admin agreements that have a lot of creative services attached to it in exchange for getting like a higher split. So normally admin agreements, you know, tend to be on the lower split. I mean, all the way down as low as 95-5 to like maybe 80-20, 85-15, somewhere around there. But I have a couple of admin agreements where the comfort, it usually comes down to the comfort level of the writer, that they're sort of like, oh, I don't want to give up my publishing. Everyone always told me to hold on to my publishing, or whatever situation they're in. But they do really want the creative services, and we want to be proactive about offering those creative services. And so we're able to negotiate maybe a higher split in order to be able to do that. So there's ways around it. Under general circumstances, when a publisher has a vested interest in that copyright, it generally will include a little more proactivity, as opposed to being just like sort of passive and, you know, picking up the phone when somebody calls. But I've seen that kind of change a little over the years, and we've become more flexible. I think all of us on the publishing side have become more flexible as to how we can offer those services under any kind of structure.
Sure.
Anna, yeah. I would like to introduce two concepts that basically, because we are talking about here about different kind of publishing deals, which you have said administration and co-publishing. Basically, that's under the non-BM territories, and Spain and European countries that are BM territories in which we have direct deals with the publisher. It's not a co-publishing deal; it's a publishing deal directly with the writer, and we can sign 50-50, or we can negotiate with them in the different terms that we agree with the artist, basically, no. So in that way, we have to take into account that basically here there is another kind of agreement, which right now some publishing companies they are using, which they call some kind of writer's management agreement, in which you manage directly the writer's share. Also, you don't manage only your publishing share, because here the societies they pay directly to the writers in case they don't have an advance. If they have an advance, they pay to the publisher to recoup their advance. But basically, they pay directly to the writers. This agreement, which is the writers' management agreement, the publisher is able to collect all the money that comes from the writer and from the publishing share, and then apply to that, you know, the agreement, the share that they have agreed. No, that's not a publishing agreement. You are not a publisher. You are not acting like a publisher, and that way you're acting like a writer's management, you know, manager, whatever.
That's really interesting. Yeah, and I think that's a good overall message that, you know, the publishing industry, as global as the music world is now, there are still so many differences in different countries and different territories, just in terms of how the industry works, how the PROs work, the different societies. It is very much a global and diverse industry in terms of policies. And this a little bit segues into this question. So we've seen, I mean, obviously topping the charts in the US now, we're seeing collaborations becoming more and more popular with crossover artists, you know, remixes, tens of remixes for popular songs with different artists. How does this affect things on the contractual side in terms of music publishing? And what would you recommend a songwriter who is going to be involved in these collaborations do to make sure that they're protecting their rights and making sure they're administering properly? And Jorge, would you like to take this one?
Sure. Ideally, when there are more than two writers, the splits are worked out between the writers. And we do have situations where the remixes end up adding a great number of writers. It could be 5, 6, 7, however many, and then that makes it a little bit harder to administer, especially when the splits aren't worked out. So the biggest recommendation is for splits to be worked out in advance, if at all possible. I mean, obviously, no one wants to bring out a split sheet at the writing session because it's going to kill the vibe completely.
What if you do it at the end, like before you leave the studio, just like lock the door and be like,
it'll probably,
I'm going to try that.
It'll probably kill the vibe too, but at some point, somebody has to kill the vibe so that you avoid a lot of...
That's our job.
the publisher, that's it.
Yeah, so as hard as it is, we do recommend as publishers and as PROs, I'm sure, that splits are worked out in the fairest and most consistent way possible based on the session.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Songs. And registering songs is key with the society that you belong to. Register your percentage, or make sure you talk to your publisher and say, this is my percentage, please register my part. Because then we get registrations from everybody else, but not from you. And then it becomes a mess. We pay the wrong people. We have to do all this administration. That it's very complicated.
Yeah, register and deliver your songs to your publisher. Register with the publisher will register with the PRO for you in general. So ideally you deliver to the publisher.
Yeah, and that's something we've seen a lot is we have a number with Songtrust because we're a kind of no barrier to entry administrator. We have a ton of writers who have 5, 10, 15% on songs that are massive, and everyone else is registered. They're not participating in any of the creative or any of the touring, and they didn't realize like, oh, wait, I get part of these 200 million streams because of writing 10% of this song. And it's incredible to me how many people out there are collaborators who have not registered, who didn't realize what their rights were, who thought I'm with a PRO, I'm all set. I think that the getting registered is a really good point, like as soon as possible, once you have those splits worked out, which is hopefully as soon as possible. So this was a great question that Pablo Algado brought up. Have any of you had artists, especially those of you who are on the creative side, have you had artists experimenting with virtual collaborations, like co-writing with Zoom or FaceTime? And any success stories from that, or any, stories of it bumming people out? Do you think that we're going to experience, obviously Charlie XCX and some other people are releasing music that they recorded in quarantine, but do you think there's going to be this preponderance of kind of lockdown music being released in, say, 4 or 6 months? Pablo, since it's your question, I'd love to hear your perspective on it.
Sure. So for the time being, I think it's the new normal.
Yeah.
It's virtual sessions. That's the only way to go, given the circumstances. The feedback that I've gotten from the artists and writers have been a very mixed, but I would say that more than half of them are not feeling it at all. And they're just doing it because they have to stay active and write songs and pitch songs, but they do miss the human interaction and the energy and the studio, just being in a studio, like in a cool studio with like 2 or 3 people, just adds to the vibe. So I don't think this is going to be like a long-term thing.
It's not going to be the new normal after we're out of quarantine. Like people aren't going to realize, oh, I don't actually need to leave my house to record a song.
I don't think so. I mean, on the other side, I've seen records that are being made in basements, and it's unfortunately it's another reason for like big studios to like lose clients, I think, because people are realizing that they can have some sort of quality like at home. Maybe Jorge disagrees on that, but Jorge.
Everyone's breaking out their 4 tracks from the 90s.
Well, what I wanted to say, thank you, Pablo. What I wanted to say was that I think it's going to be a part of the future, just like live streaming is going to be a part of touring. I don't think it's going to be either or.
Yeah.
I think that writers are finding value. Obviously, the person-to-person value, that's something that's very difficult to replace, but writers are finding value in writing in Zoom and Skype and FaceTime or whatever your service of preference is. And I think it's reflective of what the industry as a whole is going to be. I don't think that live streams that are so prevalent now are going to go away when there's a vaccine or a cure for the times that we're living in. I think that they will become a part of the industry as a whole.
I also think that what I've noticed so far during this quarantine and setting up sessions for my writers and stuff, a couple of things have happened. So the first thing obviously is if these are writers that have already worked together and know each other and they have a bit of a rapport already, then those seem to go pretty smoothly for the most part. It's again, like both of you guys are saying, it's, they know that it's going to be a part of the new normal. And so, everybody sort of has decided to take that chance. Because in the past, before quarantine, I've tried to set people up via, Zoom sessions. And there was always a bit of a, hesitation to it. So I'm happy to see that everybody's a little more open to it out of necessity, but they're also finding that, oh, wow, this actually works. I can, we can actually do this. And I think also just by the nature of what all of us do, because we're working with Latin artists that are potentially spread out all over Latin America, I've been able to get a lot more sessions put together than I could have in the past, because I didn't have to fly people around all over the world to get together, So, so it's a little more open. I wouldn't say that it's 100% success rate by any means, but I do think that it's opened up the minds of our writers to kind of, maybe get a little bit out of their comfort zone and to try out these new things, because it really can open up a lot more opportunities just because of actual physical distance in being in different countries that, maybe wasn't the case before quarantine.
Yeah, I totally agree in the way that it's not one or another. And also one of the things that we are seeing is that also it depends a lot of the generation, no? In which the writer, if the writer is super young, they are super used to get with each other through, through Zoom, Teams or whatever. And they can start working like producing songs with a producer and writer and composer, whatever, wherever they are, no? They have been already doing that previous to the COVID, no? So I think that right now, what the switch that we are having, I think that all this moment in where we are right now has speed up this change a little bit, and right now, as we are doing right now, this panel through Zoom instead of being all together, it's the same, no? I think we have to get used to that. I have two kids, 7 and 3-year-old. And the 7-year-old is using like in a daily basis Zoom for taking classes, and he's really used to get with his friends and talk through Zoom. No, so basically, I think it's something that we are gonna get used in the future. Of course, it's not gonna replace the studio time in which they are gonna get together and all that, but I think it's gonna be another tool that we are gonna have, and it's gonna make, as Yvonne has said, easier for some writers to collaborate with other writers from other parts of the globe, and that's that's a facility that we have right now.
That's a really good point. By the time that your son is a grown-up songwriter, he'll be ready to collaborate with anyone.
He's a trapper.
So going over to the world of sync licensing, for those of you who are involved in that pitching process, as the amount, obviously right now we're kind of in a lull because nobody is producing TV outside. The empty sound stages of Greenpoint, Brooklyn, where I live, are a test to that. But in the overall landscape, have you seen major changes in the way that music supervisors are conducting searches as the kind of amount of television being produced for all these streaming services has increased? And specifically, how much of an advantage is it these days to those who are able to control both the master and publishing sides and kind of create that one-stop shop for publishing clearance? And Pablo Algado, if you'd like to answer this one.
Sure. I'll take the second part of that question. The master and pub, yes. I think it's important when you're pitching songs for music supervisors, it's important, and it helps to own or represent both the master and the publishing. If it's a very famous song that the supervisor wants anyway, then it doesn't matter. Like, he's gonna call like all the publishers and all the labels, and I'm gonna clear that song. But if you're trying to pitch lesser known artists or songs, it definitely helps if the one doing the pitching, I can represent both sides. So.
And would that be something that you or anyone else on the panel would recommend a songwriter take into consideration when they're considering signing a publishing deal? Like, say they're already with a label, is it enough of a concern that they should consider, going independent, or, working with a DIY service where they continue to control the sync licensing approvals on the publishing side?
I think if sync is a focus for that particular writer, or, the style of music that they're creating lends itself, really well to sync placements. then it's absolutely something to keep in mind. Obviously, if they're signed to a major label or to a label, even an independent label that has sync rights, then that's not really an option. But we've tried to, whenever possible, for our independent writer artists that are very focused on sync, to work out at least some kind of a representation agreement with them, so that we're at least, even on a non-exclusive basis, able to rep both sides, to be able to license on their behalf on the master side, so that we can, because sometimes those things are like, it's got to be cleared in 24 hours if you're lucky,
Yeah, 24
and so
outside.
yeah, so even just having that like as a placeholder, and then also, because it's not our core business at all to be a label in any way, we'll keep that stuff pretty flexible. And if that artist eventually signs to a label that they then need to transfer those rights over to, then we relinquish our non-exclusive rights. So it's something to always keep in mind, particularly for sync, because sometimes the turnarounds are really, really quick, and the easier that stuff can get handled, the better.
Well, that's a really interesting idea for artists who own their own masters but have a publisher, is to do some sort of assignment like you're talking about, to make sure that they're able to get everything cleared quickly. And obviously, if you have a publisher working for you and doing creative services, as well as a label pitching you on the master side, those are two different people repping your music, which could be its own advantages. Are there any other pros and cons that anyone on the panel can identify about either having those rights in one place or having them in two places, other than the kind of ease of sync clearance?
In the BMG case, we control both sides of the business, the recording and the publishing side, and under the same company, and basically it's to have that one-stop option. No, it's easier when we are pitching songs for advertisements, for the TV series, Netflix or whatever. It's much easier because you have all the rights, you control everything. You normally, when you pitch, you inform to the client that you control both sides, and that's that if they want it, they will get it with just one request. You don't have to ask for more. So basically, in our case, of course, we have in both sides, we have writers and artists that they have both contracts with us, or we have only writers, or we have only artists, and basically that's our feeling, no? That if you control 100%, and in some cases in which we are signing writers and they don't have a label, we have started working together because of that, basically, of having that option. Of course, distributing the music through the different services, DSPs and the retailers physically. But basically it's that, no? In our case, we feel that it's easier, faster, and the sync business, I've been working 8 years there. It's like you have to be like super fast, no? Because no one is waiting for that. So.
And it's only getting faster, it seems like.
Yeah. If I may, I think that the one-stop shop is certainly useful, but it's not absolutely necessary. And if you're an independent artist and you get a sync request and you don't know exactly what it means or what the terms are and so on, there's a danger that you're gonna miss out on the opportunity. And established publishers have relationships with pretty much all of the main music supervisors or the companies that are going to be using music. So as a publisher, we should be able to negotiate the license and effect the license quickly and so on. So whereas I think that it's useful to have a one-stop shop, I don't think it's absolutely necessary, or I don't think that it should be the reason why you sign to a publisher or not.
Right.
Actually, publishers could be useful too in other ways.
Right, absolutely. They're going to have the ability to understand the market rate for a placement. They're going to have the leverage to negotiate up. They know the music supervisor. They might know what their budgets really are. So that's a really good point. There's that additional knowledge that publisher sync departments have when it comes to those music supervisors and shows and relationships that can really benefit songwriters.
Can I add to that too? You need to understand always what you're signing and what you're giving.
Absolutely.
And sometimes you're a creator and you really don't understand the paperwork or the legality of it. So you do need a publisher to help you navigate that and help you understand what you're signing. It's very important.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point from both of you guys. So speaking of understanding things, one area of collections that a lot of songwriters and rights holders don't understand is the royalty breakdown when it comes to YouTube. They know there's money, question mark. They don't know how to collect it. They don't know what types of royalties they're owed. I'd be interested if, Jorge, you'd be able to do a breakdown, and maybe if you have any other insight about YouTube and other kind of tricky types of royalties that people tend to miss, especially when they're starting out.
Okay, so YouTube essentially monetizes the videos that are on its site via advertising, and that's the ad-supported side of the YouTube business. And then they also have YouTube Music, which is a subscription side of the music business, of the YouTube music business. So that the subscription side works like a Spotify subscription does. Basically, subscribers will pay a monthly amount. There'll be a royalty pool, and based on the number of streams, that royalty pool will be divided. And I'm speaking very much in general because the agreements vary by territory and by legislation. On the ad-supported side, there is a reproduction or a mechanical portion, and then there's also a performance portion of the royalties. Depending on the territory, these get paid out to songwriters, either via their publishers or via societies. In the US, and I believe it's the only territory, YouTube is licensed as a synchronization.
Yeah.
So in the US, publishers will collect directly from YouTube. In Latin America, it's a mixture. We collect the performance right via the societies, and we'll collect the mechanical right via the publishers. I think that is it in a nutshell. The BM societies in Europe will collect all rights typically. Mm-hmm. And we won't get into the different hubs in Europe because it gets complicated, but bottom line, there's typically a third party with whom you as a writer will make an agreement, either via PRO affiliation or a publishing agreement, to collect your YouTube income.
Absolutely. And with YouTube, it's a little bit unique because there are third-party services that are specifically designed for YouTube to collect on the master and composition sides, and in addition to like optimize your YouTube channel when it comes to searches. So those services also exist with YouTube, which makes it kind of unique among other types of rights that songwriters might collect. So YouTube is a revenue source that, continues to grow, but obviously there are the TikToks of the world. There are, new sources down the line that will be using compositions that will continue to grow. And I would love to hear, if everybody or any of you that have a perspective on what do you see coming down the line in terms of new types of composition usage, new types of revenue sources that we might anticipate within the next 5 years.
Live stream. Yeah. I mean, this is starting to happen now. People are getting their minds wrapped around exactly how the licensing and the rights are going to be distributed. And it's pretty exciting because it's like a new source of business born out of necessity. But it's here to stay. I would argue.
Absolutely, I think that's really interesting because you used to see, the big festivals would require artists to sign up to be part of their live stream and waive all their royalties. And I think now that live streaming is live performance, people are going to have to, give artists more leverage when it comes to those royalties. What do you think, Yvonne?
Yeah, I totally agree. Live streaming is absolutely going to be something that we're going to see a lot more of going forward. I'm also, any opportunities that artists have to promote their music in non-traditional ways, like the TikToks and Triller and that kind of stuff, I always find them very fascinating. Obviously, on the publishing side, they can be complicated, and every time something new pops up, we have to go back in and renegotiate and figure out how to make sure that our writers are going to be fairly compensated for all of those things. But from a purely promotional standpoint, I find those things to be really exciting, particularly for developing artists, also for, maybe styles of music that are a little left of center and are not your traditional, like radio friendly type music. And for younger audiences, all that stuff is really, really cool. So I'm always kind of keeping an eye on that stuff just from the creative perspective. And then my legal department starts to pull the reins on me and tells me, wait, we're still trying to figure out how to get paid on that stuff.
Yeah, they're always concerned about the new ideas.
Yeah.
Gabriella, do you have any especially from the PRO perspective, in terms of new revenue sources that you expect will kind of continue to grow?
Well, I mean, I agree. It's live stream. It is a challenge for us, I think, to collect from new services that come along. We've gotten, it's gotten much better, and we've been, fighting to get more money for the songwriters, and we will keep at it.
Yeah.
It'll come a point where it's going to be second nature, like cable was when it first started. They didn't pay at the beginning, and it was a huge fight, and now it's second nature. So hopefully that'll happen too with all the new services that come along in the future.
Yeah, I mean, YouTube didn't pay. Yeah.
Yeah, well, what I think is key in all this in the future revenues that we're going to get is what Yvonne has said. No, basically that we need to get a fair agreement to get our writers like paid fairly. So because there is a value gap between the recording side and the publishing side, that in all the digital platforms and all that we think we should try to work on that. No. And of course, TikTok and all the live shows, all the live streamings here in Spain and Portugal, we are seeing how it's increasing all the music coming from streaming, but not just music streaming, but audiovisual streaming. All the HBO, Disney, Netflix, and all that. It's starting growing here, and the sources of revenue as the television, as we know it today, is disappearing, and the people is moving to these on-demand services. I think that's to have like a fair agreement with all the DSPs to get our writers paid fairly. I think that's the key point on all this, no?
For sure. Pablo, do you have since you're coming from the creative side, what is your kind of creative thinking about the future of the publishing world?
Definitely a live stream, and the few reports that I've seen as far as stuff that has happened since the pandemic is that the consumption has increased. It's mostly for music videos,
yes,
not necessarily for music streaming. So that for me, I mean, was at least a surprise. And so definitely the future is on music videos on all types of platforms, even more so now.
Everyone will have to make up a dance every time they release.
They have like a silly dance to promote their song, for sure.
So we have some pre-submitted audience questions. So we're going to move into the Q&A portion. So we have a question. This is a tough one from Maria from Seattle. So she says, I'm writing songs with my band members, and I feel that we are not splitting the songs evenly, as only two of us are really composing. What do you suggest is a diplomatic way to explain that to my bandmates? The tough guys.
Well, my suggestion in this case, basically, I think that all the publishers probably we have had this situation at some point.
Yes.
and basically what I try to explain to our writers is that basically a song is divided in 50% music, 50% lyrics, and you have to split whether you have been involved in the writing of the lyrics. If, for example, the lead singer is the one that is writing the lyrics, you have 50% of the song, and then you want to split the music part between the rest of the band members, because they have been adding value to the song in the studio or in the basement or whatever. You split it between them, no? But basically here, what we normally see is that when a band is starting, they normally split the song equally in all the members, and when they are growing and the money is coming, the money is flowing, they start looking at the splits. No, I'm writing more of the lyrics.
I'm the one who wrote the hit saying, wait, we need to change this.
Yeah, that's it.
I think in my experience, once you start trying to parse out who wrote what part of the song, what word, and so on, especially for a band, I don't mean necessarily for a session, but for a band, it makes for very difficult conversations, and you can create fault lines with the relationships that are never properly healed. So my recommendation, if you are truly in a band, typically, and this just makes it easier, is to split things evenly, because that argument or that understanding of who wrote what is very subjective.
Mhm.
You have 4 writers and you'll get 4 different answers. And sometimes it's actually very obvious who writes the songs, but then I would argue that the band together, those people in the same room together, are also bringing a certain energy to the writing. So as far as being able to be around for a while, it's, as far as bands are concerned, my recommendation would be to split things equally.
Yeah, that's the point. That's the ideal world, I think, and I completely agree with you, Jorge. The thing is that normally I think that the question comes because probably they don't agree, because that's it, no? So the thing is that I completely agree that the vibe is, if you start like thinking about who has wrote what or whatever, normally in my experience is because there is money flowing and someone is concerned about that. And you don't want to split that with because you feel that you're working more in that field than the other band members, no? So yeah, when you have to solve that kind of problem, of course, the best situation is, split it equally to all of the members. But normally one of the band members come to you saying, I don't want to split equally. What should I do? And what is the rationale behind that? How can I explain this or whatever? Of course, I think there should be a rational and an emotional part on that also, no?
Yeah.
And have it in writing, always. Yes, whatever decision that you guys agree to, if it's going to equally split or not, always have it in writing, even if it's just an email, saying, okay, this is what we agreed upon. That's always the most important thing. I think.
It requires, just a level of transparency and just like honesty amongst each other. And just like in a session in the studio, or a session, a composition between a band, in a band scenario where everybody is potentially participating in the creation of that song. It's just, you just have to have, it's a tough conversation to have, but it has to be done. And you have to, at that moment, everyone be comfortable with what the decision, the decision that they make as to how to split that stuff up. But there's always the potential for some level of animosity down the road. There's all you can do is the best that you can at that moment and make sure everybody is comfortable with what you've decided at that time, and then just kind of move forward. But it just requires some transparency.
Yeah, and I think that the key takeaway is it's a lot easier to have the conversation before there's money than
Absolutely.
it is after there's money.
Mm-hmm.
That's when people get really upset.
Yeah.
So Matthias from Tijuana asks, what's the fastest way to copyright a song? And maybe the question that we can answer is, how do you file the kind of poor man's copyright? Is it necessary for most songwriters to formally file copyrights? And what are the pros and cons of doing so? And Gabriela, I don't know if you want to take this one, if you have any particular feelings about copyrights and songwriters.
Well, if you have a publisher, the publisher will help you with that. If you don't, LAMC.gov here in the United States, it gives you the form, you fill it out, and you submit your songs for copyright. I know there's such a thing as a poor man's copyright, which is sending the song to yourself and never opening the envelope. But to be honest with you, that doesn't really hold up in court. So if you really want to do things the right way, I would suggest you either ask your publisher or go to your local copyright office. In the United States, it's LAMC.gov.
And that's a really good point. You don't need to file a formal copyright. You own it because you've recorded it. But if it does come to a plagiarism lawsuit, you're going to be in a lot better place if you do actually formally file a copyright. Does anyone else have any sob stories of non-filed copyrights or any additional input on that issue?
No sob stories on my end, but what I will tell you, it's Tijuana, Mexico. You probably want to go to SACM for some guidance, which is the local society over there. And they'll be able to give you guidance.
Our final question, and this is similar, but it brings a really interesting current issue to the fore, which is Hugo from Buenos Aires asks, can I copyright a beat? And this is something that comes up with us at Songtrust a lot because there are so many beat leasing and beat selling services out there. And the question is, what are the different ways that someone who is, providing a beat for a fee, either exclusively or non-exclusively, what are their rights on the back end when someone makes a song with that beat and, it blows up?
That's a complicated one.
Yeah, that's lots of answers.
There is a standard answer.
I would argue that you do copyright a beat. There are many services that provide licenses. Once you license the beat, you pay a certain fee, and the license for the license that you get for that fee allows you to use that beat on certain parameters.
Sure.
So we at Sony TV, we did an agreement just recently with BeatStars. And that's exactly what that is. It gives you certain levels whereby you can use the beat. And then if the song becomes a major hit, then you negotiate. So all of this would imply that you do have rights over that beat.
Absolutely.
I also think, I'm sorry, I just wanted to point one other thing out too, because it's a conversation that I have really often with top liners, the person that writes the lyric and melody on top of the beat and with the beat maker. And a point that I make to them very often is that if the beat already existed and a top liner came in and wrote a lyric and melody based on that beat, those two things are forever married because that beat inspired the lyric and melody that came to it. So even if you pull that beat away and give it to another producer and they completely reproduce the track, that original beat maker should always be a part of that composition, of the creation of that original composition. And so I think that that's one of those things that people they just assume it's like arrangement or it's production, because there's also this like the beat selling side of it where they're getting paid a fee for maybe their stems or, the use of the actual recorded part of that beat. But if it becomes an inspiration point for a lyric and melody, then I do think that it's really important to know that those two things should forever be married in the composition itself.
I think here we have to split the recording side and the publishing side of the beat, because basically if you pay for the beat, you are paying basically for the recording side normally, and the publishing, the beat is part of the music. You should have a part of the copyright because of that. No, of course there are services, as Jorge has said, that a lot of trappers here, for example at BMG. They are using those kind of services, and those services, depending on the fee that you are paying, on the license that you get, you can get one kind of rights or others. No, basically in the Spanish law, a writer can't sell his or her writer share to another writer. You are the writer, and you have the right to have that right in that song. In the copyright, basically, if you don't want, or if you reach an agreement with the other writer or with the artist that's going to use that beat, that's all the story. That's a agreement between the two parts, and then you have to see how you're going to pay that that beat maker, or that the beat maker, how it's going to pay to the artist the money that's going to receive from the society or whatever. No. But yeah, I think that the beat is part of the music, that it should be registered the same.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, the fact that there are different types of these beat selling, beat leasing arrangements. Like some are specifically royalty bearing, some are non-exclusive, and the license says there's no back end royalties. Whether that's legal everywhere, it's clearly not. But I think maybe this kind of goes back to a point that was made earlier, which is just make sure you know what you're doing. BeatStars, obviously their terms of service are pretty clear on their site. Other services like Airbit or Splice are doing kind of similar things, but just make sure that before you lease or sell your beat to someone, you know exactly what rights you're retaining and exactly what rights you're granting them, because you, again, want to have that conversation before they have, you know, the next Old Town Road and you've, you know, sold it for $19.95.
Right. Make sure that you're not using any samples.
Yes. Oh my God.
Or if you are using samples, I mean, just be aware that,
Yes.
that, I mean, that part has to be cleared as well. So.
Yeah, I mean, samples, we could do a whole other panel.
Yeah,
I could just tell you horror stories about albums delivered on delivery date with samples that they didn't tell us about ahead of time, but that's another story. Guys, any final remarks? I think we're about to wrap up. This has been really awesome. It's been great to have all these different perspectives, but I would love to hear, you know, your words of hope and support for musicians during this strange period of the world's history.
Yeah, I mean, I would, you know, I talk to my writers every single day, and I do think that there's a lot of hope that, you know, we'll come out of this and figure out a way to move forward. And, you know, even as scary as it is that things might be completely different going forward, I think there still is a lot of hope. And, you know, out of adversity, the most incredible art has always come to the forefront. And so I'm really excited to see what happens in the future with musically and how all of this affects our artistic perspective too.
Yeah, I just want to commend my colleagues here in this panel, all of you, because we are all working for songwriters at some level or another. And so all that hope is reflected in the people here in this panel. So really, it's a great time that's going to determine the future, and a lot of the things that are going to happen that are happening right now are going to be embedded into our collective music publishing and musical future. And it's really up to us as advocates for our songwriters to help forge that way as best as we can. Obviously, on the creative side, our songwriters will lead the way, but if we can help just a little bit, then we will have accomplished something. So I want to commend everyone here in this panel for that.
I will thank you for having me here in the panel, and the rest of you guys. To all the people that are listening, I would just say, keep creating. You know, this too shall pass, and there's going to be lots of amazing music that's coming. I mean, that's going to come out of it. If you're trying to make it in the music industry, be patient. The industry as a whole is kind of in a pause, but again, this will pass, and people, you know, will start hiring, you know, and looking for other people. So I just keep creating. That's all you can do. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the same from my side. I think no pandemic is gonna stop the music, you know, and it's gonna stop the creativity. And I think that we have to look to the good part of all of this, that we have right now more ways of connecting with other writers, and we should be super positive and looking forward to, you know, to continue creating and continue writing songs, and as we have talked in this panel, to start like working in other ways and with other platforms and with other sources of income. I think that there is a broad, right now there is a lot of room to grow there outside. And we as publishers, as societies, we have to support our writers. That's our aim, and that's what we are here for. So let's go.
Yeah, we admire what you do, and we're listening to you, and we're here for you. You know, we're working from home, but we're here for you. So reach out. We're definitely here.
Yeah, that's a great point. We're all here to advocate for musicians in thick and thin. And thank you so much to everyone for being on this panel. It has been truly wonderful to hear everyone's diverse perspectives. And, you know, I hope that all our listeners out there in the virtual land, you know, have gotten a lot that can help them stay inspired and take care of their business side of things. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.